What if a ghost could solve her own murder? Over a century ago, in the mountains of West Virginia, a grieving mother claimed to be visited by the spirit of her daughter, resulting in the only murder case in the United States to be solved, allegedly, by a ghost's testimony. Appalachia is well known for its rich folklore, especially in its tales of ghosts and witches and supernatural oddities. Home to the Mothman, the Bone Lady, and the Tennessee Wild Man. Much of the region's folklore blends the legends of its indigenous residents with the fairy lore of Irish and Scottish settlers. But in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, one of America's most famous ghost stories took flight, and its events are centered around a very peculiar murder trial. I'm Nicole Miras, and this is Fireside Fables. In October of 1896, a woman named Zona Heaster Shue married a man named Erasmus Stribling Edward Trout Shue. Shue went by her middle name, Zona, and Erasmus Shue's name appears differently in different records, but he generally went by Trout. Zona and Trout settled in the Richlands, a small farming community in Greenbrier County about 5 miles west of Lewisburg. Both Zona and Trout had complicated backgrounds, but as this was a very poor, very rural part of the country, early records of their lives are spotty. We know from West Virginia's state birth records that Zona gave birth to a baby boy out of wedlock on November 29, 1895. However, it's unclear who the father was. Records merely state that the father is supposed to be George Wooldridge. This was about a year before she met Trout, and it's also unclear what happened to her son. This birth record states that the mother, Zona, was 22, but her death records from her murder in 1897 also state that she was 22. So we don't know exactly how old she was, but we can assume she was in her early 20s. Meanwhile, Zona was not Trout's first wife. His first wife, Almira Shores, divorced him, and she testified in court that he was an incredibly abusive husband. His second wife, Lucy Ann Tritt, died about a year or two before Trout met Zona. There are no surviving records of her cause of death, though in later accounts of the Greenbrier murder case, the press noted that Lucy Ann Tritt died under mysterious circumstances. Now, we don't actually know if that's true, or if this was something suggested after Zona's death. Zona's parents, as you can probably guess, were not happy about this match. But Zona and Trout did settle in the Richlands in October of 1896. 3 months later, she would be found dead. An African-American family, the Joneses, lived on the neighboring farmstead. On January 23rd, 1897, Trout Shue asked the Joneses' son, Anderson, who went by Andy, to stop by the Shue's farmstead with the promise of a small job, gathering eggs from the chicken coop. Andy Jones, who was about 11 years old at the time, reported that Trout also asked him to check on Mrs. Shue, Zona, on his way out, just to see if she needed anything. But when Andy arrived at the Shue's property, he noticed that the house was dark, and he had a foreboding sense that something was amiss. When he entered the house, calling for Zona, he found her lifeless body at the bottom of the stairs. The child ran next door to alert his mother, Martha, and soon the community tracked down Trout. Witnesses reported that Trout was inconsolable, that he seemed devastated. He asked them to go find a local physician named Dr. Knapp. Here's where things get weird. When they returned with the doctor, Trout had already changed Zona's outfit. Her new dress had, quote, a high-collared neck and a large veil several times folded and tied in a large bow under her chin. In other words, her neck was completely covered. Records here are a bit murky. Allegedly, Dr. Knapp ruled that her death was caused by a heart attack, but the Greenbrier County Death Book recorded that she had died in childbirth. Some reports alleged that Dr. Knapp had been treating Zona for some illness for a few weeks, but there are no records from the doctor that confirm this. Zona's body was taken to her parents' home on Little Seawall Mountain for the wake. It was then that Trout's behavior began to arouse suspicion. Some thought that his behavior was very over the top, as if he was trying to prove that he was grieving. He allegedly wouldn't allow anyone to touch Zona, and he lingered by the casket. Zona's mother, Mary Jane Hester, began to believe that Trout had something to do with her daughter's death. Even with the high-collared dress, Zona's neck had a loose appearance. That week, Mary Jane prayed to God for a chance to speak with her daughter's spirit. She knew something wasn't right, that Zona had not died of natural causes. And suddenly, her prayers were answered. Mary Jane claimed that she was visited for several nights by Zona's ghost. The ghost stated that her murderer was indeed Trout, who strangled her in a fit of rage. As Mary Jane later testified, quote, "He was mad that she didn't have no meat cooked for supper. And she said, I had plenty. Don't you think that he was mad and just took down all my nice things and packed them away and ruined them? She came 4 times and 4 nights, but the second night she told me that her neck was squeezed off at the first joint and it was just as she told me." Mary Jane responded by visiting John Alfred Preston, the prosecutor of Greenbrier County. She begged him to look more closely into Zona's death, that she was sure her daughter had been murdered. Preston finally relented and he ordered for Zona's body to be exhumed. And it was just as Mary Jane had said. The corpse revealed clear evidence of strangulation. Trout Shue was promptly arrested. Trout waited in jail for several months for his trial, and in the meantime, the story was allowed to fester in Greenbrier. Members of the community believed that he had possibly murdered his second wife as well, and some also claimed that Trout threatened to end his life in prison. On July 1st, 1897, when Trout finally took the stand, he claimed that he was innocent of all charges. The prosecutors took care not to mention the ghost in their questioning. By then, they had more than enough evidence to convict Trout, and they didn't want any peculiar tales to dissuade the jury. But Trout's defense attorney thought that mentioning the ghost would help to make Mary Jane Hester seem crazy. When she was asked about the ghost on the stand, Mary Jane Hester reiterated the same story: the nightly visitations, the messages from her daughter, and that the ghost's description of events lined up with the evidence on Zona's corpse. The efforts to delegitimize Mary Jane's testimony failed. Trout was convicted of Zona's murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Many Greenbrier locals felt that this was not a severe enough punishment for Trout, though the attempts to form a lynch mob were squashed by authorities. And he ended up dying in prison after an outbreak of tuberculosis. The story that would dominate headlines was, of course, the ghost. Despite the fact that the prosecution never indulged in spectral evidence, the media's retelling was that the ghost had proven her murder. Today, there's a roadside marker near her burial ground in Smoot, West Virginia, that corroborates this legend. Only known case in which testimony from a ghost helped convict a murder. Ultimately, the story captures the unique character of Appalachian folklore, a region that is often overlooked by political leaders, whose people are accustomed to having to advocate fiercely for themselves. Doubly so for women in this period who lacked legal protections from domestic violence. Here we have a mother who is forced to fight for her daughter and to ensure that her daughter's killer can't do the same to the next victim. Finally, it reveals how ghost stories and hauntings are often intertwined with seeking justice for past wrongs, in which the dead won't rest until they are avenged. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy learning about folklore and spooky stories from history, please make sure that you're subscribed. We have new episodes every single week. Be well, and I'll see you next time.